Jesus. One piece of software. Here we go.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this, it's Sunday. It's Sunday, and today's gonna be fun. I'm excited to have back on the show Bradley Thompson, who is from Clemson University. He's been on the show many times. We're going to talk about the right, particularly one part of the right, or I guess a whole group of people on the right of various types. Before that, a few just quick reminders to everybody. Don't forget before you leave the show to like the show. That really helps with the algorithms on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and don't forget to support the show. You can do so on Super Chat right while we're talking, and of course, questions for Dr. Thompson, questions for me. Priority will be given to two things: one, questions on topic, and two, questions that carry, more dollars. It's very simple. The more dollars you put in the question, the more likely it is we will answer it. If you really want to get my attention, add a bunch of zeros to the original digits, and we'll get to the question really, really fast. All right. Let's see. What else do we need to do before we get started? I will remind everybody, just as a note, I will be doing a show tomorrow. So we'll be talking tomorrow and on Tuesday. And that's it. Let's jump in. Hey, Brad.
Hey, Yaron. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Doing fine.
We've got this on view side by side. We're going to switch to speaker view. I think people prefer that. And so I remember about 5 years ago, we started talking about kind of the alt-right. And I remember I did a couple of shows, I think, on what was then kind of the Yaron Brook Show or something similar, about the alt-right. And then, of course, we had an election and everything else happened. And that's when I kind of noticed them and the alt-right. And, after the show, I got all this anti-Semitic stuff, and it was pretty nasty. And they've been around since then at the fringes, nipping away. And we'd been talking about this phenomenon on the right for a long time. But when did this kind of come to consciousness for you? When did this issue become real? And then what has stimulated kind of your more recent interest in writing and engagement with this?
Yeah. So as you said, 4 or 5 years ago, I think we both started hearing about becoming moderately interested in what at the time was called the alt-right. And, I think the turning point event was Charlottesville. And the protests in Charlottesville and the aftermath of what happened in Charlottesville. And I think, it shocked me, it shocked you, it shocked, I think, a lot of people that there was this movement, which at the time consisted of a number of sort of very disparate groups, I would say, from neo-Nazis to various white nationalist front people, various identitarian groups. I mean, I think the coalition that formed at Charlottesville was actually a fairly broad spectrum group of people that loosely went under the name of the alt-right. Probably the most famous person associated with the alt-right, and I think the guy who gave the name to it is this Richard Spencer guy, who was a white nationalist type. But with Charlottesville, the whole thing seemed to implode. And in fact, it really did implode. The alt-right died, I think, in many ways at Charlottesville. And then that whole sort of movement just kind of, it seemed on the surface, to my way of thinking, it kind of disappeared. And then it was now, I guess, 2 years ago that I became aware of a different kind of movement that was not necessarily associated with the alt-right. And it was a movement that was primarily online, that grew out of places like 4chan and 8chan. And it was largely an underground movement of young people who took Pepe the Frog as their mascot.
Well, Pepe was really the mascot of the alt-right even 5 years ago.
Maybe, yeah, might have been. But Pepe only came to me sort of post alt-right, and this was the time of Milo Yiannopoulos and other people like that, and I started noticing that young people in particular were latching onto this. I had been aware of, following, had been writing on the sort of generic right for quite a number of years.
Well, we wrote a book together, right?
That's right.
On the neoconservatives.
I did a book on neoconservatism, and I'd actually been sort of writing on the conservative intellectual movements for probably 20 years, even prior to the neocon book. And, but the right, broadly speaking, both conservative and libertarian, was largely a movement that had increasingly become focused in Washington, D.C., and in the major conservative and libertarian think tanks: Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, Competitive Enterprise Institute, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a movement at the time, and now we're talking sort of 2000 up to maybe 2010 at the most. It was a movement led by these white paper think tanks, for lack of a better term. So in other words, it was a movement. It was a movement of grown-ups, you might say. But then all of a sudden, I don't know, I think around 2017, I became aware that there was this underground movement of young people, and they were entirely online. And so I started exploring. I mean, I had a kind of a personal interest in the subject, because it turns out somebody that I had known had been a part of this world, which I knew nothing about. Mm-hmm. And so I started exploring it, and I quickly discovered, and you and I have talked about this at the time, young 14-year-old girl who goes by the name of Soph, who was putting out these incredibly provocative, that's putting it mildly, videos. And she had 1 million followers on YouTube. And then there was this guy, Sam Hyde, who's very popular on what I call the dissidents right, and he had his own TV show, and the guy was frankly kind of a madman. And so anyway, I started following this world. And then I think the turning point came in August of 2018. And interestingly enough, two, I'd say, important things happened that year. The first was Jordan Peterson's sort of disappearance. That's when Peterson just sort of fell off the map. Or maybe that was 2019.
19, he fell off the map in 19, yeah.
And so in August of 2019, Jordan Peterson just fell off the edge of the earth. Yep. And he stopped giving talks. And I think most people know his very sad story since then. But the very same month, the Claremont Review of Books published a review by Michael Anton, who was the author of the infamous Flight 93 election essay that really was a kind of catalyst behind the Trump campaign in 2016.
People don't know that essay. Can you quickly give it a one paragraph summary?
Yeah, the thesis is think of the 2016 election as Flight 93, and you're a passenger on Flight 93, and you basically have two options. You can just go down with the plane that's been taken over by terrorists, or you can, against all odds, try and fight the terrorists and take back the plane, and maybe you have some small possibility of surviving. But basically, the argument
go down anyway, but at least you fought, in a sense.
But at least you fought, and that's how Anton viewed Trump's election. The left has become increasingly totalitarian. They are going to destroy America. Trump, for all of his vices and flaws, is the only possibility to fight the left. So you might as well vote for Trump. So Anton wrote a review of a book titled Bronze Age Mindset by the perversely named Bronze Age Pervert. And up until that point, I'm not sure that I even heard of the book or of the Bronze Age Pervert. But that review, which was a review that was both in awe and in shock of this book by Bronze Age Pervert. But on the whole, though, I would say the Anton review was generally speaking, at the very least, fascinated by Bronze Age mindset, if not somewhat supportive of the Bronze Age mindset. And from that moment forward, certainly in one small corner of the online dissident right, particularly amongst graduate students in political philosophy, all of a sudden, the Bronze Age Pervert and his book became the hottest ticket in town. And so the Bronze Age Pervert has a very large following on Twitter, almost 60,000 followers on Twitter. He has a very popular podcast called Caribbean Rhythms. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I started becoming very interested in what was happening with the online dissident right. And because, I'm a university professor, I'm interested in what young people are interested in. And with this larger interest in that I've had for decades now on the right, in an interest in conservatism and libertarianism, I just started following this stuff. And well, go ahead.
So, well, I mean, Anne has a question where she's attempting to insult both of us, but she says, you did a show on BAP a year ago from Bad Suggestion. It was actually longer than a year ago, but yes. At what point is the focus on the fringe right a way to steer clear of cancel culture? I mean, you're talking to Brad, who has been, cancel culture has attempted to cancel many times and has fought them vigorously on campus and has published op-eds against them and has done, all kinds of work with regard to cancel culture. And I basically devoted, 50% of the last few shows to cancel culture. So what you want and what many of these people want is that we never talk about the fringe right, because the only enemy is the left. And this is a good question, I guess. Is it true that is BAP our friend because the left is our enemy?
Well, the answer to that is absolutely not. Right. So that's why in just almost a year ago now, so I guess in May of 2020, I wrote this essay that has caused an enormous firestorm of controversy titled The Rise and Fall of the Pajama Boy Nietzscheans, a title that you just can't get out of your head. And with that, then I have spent the last 10 months of my life battling with these guys who have launched a kind of personal not ideological, interestingly enough, but a personal jihad against me. And so if for some reason Anne thinks that Brad Thompson hasn't been a victim of both the woke right and the woke left, she's sorely mistaken. I've spent an entire academic career being attacked and attempts to cancel me by both the right and the left. I'm probably one of the few people in history who's been FOIA'd 3 times. That is, I've had freedom of information requests where hundreds of pages of my emails have been produced and attempted to make public. So,
but this is a trend on among certain people affiliated with objectivism that, and it's a trend I think on the right more broadly, on the better right, that there's only one enemy, and that's the left, and we should focus all our energy, all our efforts on that, and ignore the right. So we've done 2 shows by Anne's own admission in 1 year, right? A year ago and now, and that to her she's going apoplectic because of 2 shows, because we haven't dedicated every second of every waking moment to attacking cancel culture, which is being attacked by us, but also by plenty of people. I mean, there's a whole army out there attacking culture every single day. Anyway, back to Baps. So you published Pajama Nietzscheans, which is one of the great titles ever, and it really got them. It got people talking. But before we get to Bap, before we really dig into Bap, the article doesn't just go after Bap. I mean, and I don't want to present it as Bap is the only force on the right that we think is worthy dealing with. But it also takes on kind of the tradcons, traditional conservatives. So talk a little bit about tradcons, and then maybe broader, what you consider the dissident right, and who counts within the dissident right.
Right. So, there are all kinds of sub-factions in the dissident right. I've been primarily concerned with, I think, the 2 largest factions, the so-called Catholic tradcons, or Cath trads, as they're sometimes called, on the one hand, and then primarily Bronze Age Pervert and his followers on the other hand. The Catholic tradcons, as they're called, in the essay, The Pajama Boy Nietzscheans, I take up primarily 2 of the leading voices of the Catholic tradcons, a professor of political science at Notre Dame, a guy named Patrick Deneen, who wrote a book called Why Liberalism Failed, and then Sohrab Ahmari, who is the editor of the New York Post. And what I try to do in the Pajama Boy Nietzscheans essay is demonstrate that both of these factions of the reactionary right are profoundly anti-American. And in fact, not only are they that, but they join with the left in their anti-Americanism. So in the essay, I begin with a critique of the 1619 Project, and then I turn to these 2 factions, which I consider to be equally anti-American. And they are openly and explicitly anti-American. So the Catholic tradcons, for instance, on the one hand, they want to argue that all of the things that they regard to be corrupt, immoral, and evil in 21st century America, and this would be primarily on cultural issues. So Sohrab Ahmari seems particularly exercised by drag queen reading hour, for instance, right? But what Ahmari and Deneen want to argue is that the nihilism and moral relativism of late 20th and 21st century liberalism is the direct result. Indeed, it is the culmination of the principles of the American founding. So for Deneen and Amari, there is a straight line between the Declaration of Independence and the Port Huron Statement, which was the New Left statement of the 1960s, that there's a direct relationship between Thomas Jefferson's ideas and Drag Queen Story Hour, right? So it's one continuous whole. It's the working out of those ideas. And that is just simply false.
Well, and they make a very specific claim, both there and, you know, in the whole Amari Fringe, which was this fight within the right. I read a lot of kind of what these tradcons were writing. The real opposition they have is really twofold. It's the individualism, right? Individualism is what the left is about. And it's a, you know, rejection of community and tradition and the state and the common good and the public interest and all of that. So they reject individualism. They blame the founding fathers for instilling individualism, and that the inevitable outcome of individualism is the left. And then, in a sense, they don't do this explicitly. They reject reason. They reject at least the individual's capacity to think for themselves. And so what they reject is individual values. And your choice of values, your ability to use your mind, because again, that leads to subjectivism, which is what they blame that link between Jefferson and the modern left to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the way to sum it up is the founders' view is that the purpose of government is to protect the rights of individuals. For the Catholic tradcons, the purpose of government is to promote virtue and the common good, or the public welfare. And of course, I mean, that the whole idea of the common good is an anti-concept that has no basis in reality. And so they are willing to use the coercive force of the state to make men good, rather than withdrawing the coercive force of the state in order to make men free. That's the fundamental difference between their view and the founders' view. But somehow they believe that the founders' emphasis on individual rights and individualism leads to what they consider to be the corrupt culture of the world in which we live today. And so, you know, you might describe them as central planners of the right, whereas the central planners of the left want to control man's body. They want to control what he produces. These central planners of the right want to control what he thinks, and his moral views. So,
yeah, and I've noted on my show that they now have a parallel in politics, which is the people like Josh Hawley and others who admit to being central planners and want government to control much of our behavior. So there are people now in Washington who, you know, manifest these ideas, and we know we've got new think tanks centered around these kind of ideas. One by Cass and another one I forget the name of. We've got conferences of conservative nationalists who these people all affiliated with. I mean, this is more than just an academic movement. This is now an academic political movement.
Yeah, it is. And the Catholic tradcons, they tend to be somewhat more intellectually respectable because you know, they all have those fancy college degrees, and some of them teach at universities, and they have high-powered, visible positions in the media and amongst the intellectual elite. Bronze Age Pervert and his followers, however, you know, it's a movement mostly of young men, I'd say between the ages of 18 and 35. But with Bronze Age Pervert and his followers, they likewise reject the principles of the American founding. So, you know,
so what do they offer in instead? So, you know, the tradcons, we know what they offer instead. They offer kind of a traditionalist, authoritarian, you know, we're going to impose our values on you and we're going to guide society to be good. What is Baps? BAP is short for Bronze Age Pervert. What is Baps? solution? What's his ultimate state?
Well, I mean, Baps' philosophy is, there's a lot to say about it, and much of it is profoundly convoluted, but there is a kind of systematic philosophy. But to go directly to your question, I mean, what is the end point? What is the political end point of Bapism? It is, by his own admission and that of his followers, it is what they call Caesarism. So, I mean, and it's military rule. It's the military state that they are proponents of. And Bap, in the book, Bronze Age Mindset, and on his podcast, you can see he tells you who his political heroes are. They include Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, Eduardo Stroessner, Juan Perón, Salazar, and Franco from Spain and Portugal. Yeah. Right. So those are the.
There's a big revival and interest in Franco. It's interesting. He's considered the less bloody of all the dictators of the 20th century. And there's a lot of people now coming out. Oh, Franco wasn't that bad. Unbelievable.
So at the very least, it's strongman authoritarian rule, and at its worst, it's in the essays that I wrote after the rise and fall of the Pajama Boy Nietzscheans, I've sort of laid out fairly systematically Baps' moral and political philosophy, and it at the very least, it's flirting with fascism, if not openly supporting.
If you admire Saddam Hussein, you're flirting with fascism. There's no. So what is? Well, let me ask this first, and then we can get into the philosophy. I mean, it would be easy to dismiss Bap because he's a nut, and the whole ideology is insane and ridiculous and anti-American and marginal and really and pretty dumb. But what you've discovered, which I think is fascinating, and which is surprising to some extent, I think, is that many of his followers, many of the people interested in him, are smart, PhD graduates in political science at some of the best universities in the country. So he is appealing to people kind of geeks, and to people who might become teachers and might become professors and might become real influencers. That to me is what is really spooky and scary about what's going on here. It's not his ideas, which I think are easily dismissed. And it's not him, who I think is a nobody and a nothing, given that he won't even come out and give us his name. But it's the fact that his followers are, in a sense, real people. They're not just crazy young people sitting in their mother's basement, playing video games.
Well, there is some of that.
Sure.
But no, you're right. And one of the essays that I published recently, titled, what's it titled? I've got it right here. The Bap Boys and America. Yeah. And it's an attempt to understand and explain how and why a generation primarily of highly educated young men, not only in the United States, but around the world, actually, because this is becoming a worldwide movement, how and why they have become attracted to these extraordinarily bad ideas. And I think it's really important for all of us to understand that the tectonic plates underneath our culture are shifting, right? And this is really why I got interested in this, because the future is always with the young, and to understand where the country is going, you have to understand what it is that is appealing to young people. And in my particular case, I was interested in what young conservatives and libertarians were becoming interested in. And so it's important to begin with a kind of sociological profile of who these young, primarily men, but not all men, what has brought them to this, right? Because this is interesting, because many of these young men 5-6 years ago would have thought of themselves as mainstream Heritage Foundation conservatives or Cato Institute libertarians.
Yep.
But within a very short period of time, they migrated and indeed have come to reject what they call conservatism, Inc. and libertarianism, Inc. for this new philosophy. Now, why is it? I mean, who are these young men? Look, this is a generation of primarily young men who, from the time they entered kindergarten until the time they graduated from high school and then college, have been told that they are racist, sexist, and homophobic by virtue of being white, male, and heterosexual, right? And so this is a generation of young men and women who, in effect, have really felt the slings and arrows of the totalitarian left, right? In ways that you and I would not have when we were, going through elementary school and high school and college, even though we had some of it back in the day, but not like them. I mean, they are living in a stifling moral, psychological, intellectual environment and have grown up in this environment. And then all of a sudden one day, when they're maybe say in their 20s and they come to realize that Brooks Brothers conservatism and white paper libertarianism have been feckless in defending them, they have rejected, they come to reject mainstream conservatism and libertarianism. And then all of a sudden they started looking for these alternatives. Some of them initially went with the so-called alt-right, but in more recent years, they have migrated toward the Catholic tradcons and towards Bronze Age mindset. So, on the one hand, you can say, and I do say in what I've been writing, is that I get it. I understand how and why this generation has become what I've called the lost generation. They had no defenders. They had no intellectual defenders.
Yep.
And there was a vacuum that had been created by conservatism and libertarianism, Inc. Right? Nobody's interested in the Cato Institute producing another white paper on free market transportation policy. Right? That's not what interests the young today.
Yeah, there's no inspiration. There's no fight. There's no fight against the evil of the left. There's no projection of what is possible. And I noticed 5 years ago again when the alt-right was active, there were not many, but a few objectivists who kind of drifted off to the alt-right. And when you asked them why, their answer was they're at least doing something. Right. And the idea was that by spamming, or what do you call it, trolling, by doing memes, that was doing something, because these young people felt like they were fighting, right? There was a fight in them. And nobody has rallied these young people around the cause in a way, we always say it's intellectual, it takes decades. We have to write papers, you have to write articles, you have to do this stuff. They want action. They want to do something right now. And those people, those young men, and I think this is why it's primarily men, although I'll be accused of being sexist in a minute, are oriented towards action. And given that orientation towards action in the physical world, and it's not just the libertarians and the conservatives. I mean, there's very little I can tell a young person today. I said, these are the things you should act in order to change the world, because it's a big task.
Yeah, it is a big task, right? But they've been seduced by these very bad philosophies, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I have dubbed them the Fight Club right? It's this generation of young men who do want to stand up and fight, and one can be very sympathetic to that. I mean, that's how I've conducted my professional life for the last 30 years. It has been to be in the middle of a fight.
Remember that the Nazis said the same thing, right? I mean, they came out and said, we need to act. We need to do something about the state of the world, the left, and everything else. We need to act on it. So it's all about it's the same materialistic, fascist kind of orientation towards action without thought. Yeah. And we will both be fighting, but the fight takes on a different I mean, it's not a fight that everybody can be engaged in the same way because of the nature of the fight.
Yeah. And look, I will say, I mean, you can think of, for instance, Bap and his followers in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So there are some things that I can understand how and why it is that young men today would be attracted to it. So Bap is openly and explicitly anti-egalitarian.
Yep.
Right. And not only is he anti-egalitarian and has been really a quite savage critic of the left and its primary hobby horses, he's also offering something of a positive vision, which is aesthetics. So in many ways, the first thing that one has to say about BAP is that it's an aesthetic movement. He's trying to lead a kind of an aesthetic revolution, which is why, and this can be mocked to be sure, but this is why BAP on his Twitter feed, like every day, is posting photographs of sort of half-naked, muscle-bound, usually European male models.
This is the same aesthetic, exactly the same aesthetic as the Nazis and the communists. I mean, it's exactly the same. If you look at communist art from the Stalin era, it's all these buff men, doing physical labor because that's what's really. And if you look at the Nazi aesthetic, both in architecture, in sculpture, and in everything else that they did, it's the same kind of. He's not original here. I mean, Nazism was very much projected as an aesthetic movement, and Hitler spent given that he was at war, spent huge amounts of time designing the future Berlin and talking about with sculptors and architects about what it would look like. I mean, this is a big part of what these materialistic kind of fascists are all about.
Yeah, and that also translates into his political views. So in a recent podcast, BAP praised the aesthetics of Albert Speer.
Yeah.
Right. The Nazi architect, and the mass, nighttime rallies, with and the theatrics of political.
Lena Wertheimer, what was the director's name who directed all those Nazi movies? I mean, I'm sure that is massively appealing to somebody like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's anti-egalitarian. It's anti-nihilist. BAP has been profoundly influenced, and you can see it in his book Bronze Age Mindset by Nietzsche, and Nietzsche's critique of nihilism. So some of the people in your audience might know of Nietzsche's discussion of the last man. In the prologue to Thus Spake Zarathustra, and the last man is sort of the last man, is in a sense it's socialist man, and who BAP refers to as a bug man, right? It's the lowest form of life, which can be equated to essentially cattle, right? Life in modern, and by liberal I mean old liberal, life in modern liberal bourgeois society, right, according to Nietzsche and to BAP, is equivalent to herd life. It's like cows whose only life is to be in pasture, eating, defecating, and procreating, right? That's all life is in modern bourgeois society. And Nietzsche and BAP, they reject the last man, or bug life, or yeast life, as BAP refers to it, and they want a new kind of politics, a politics of greatness, where great individuals, right? And so there is also an appreciation of hierarchy and inequality in BAP's writings, but it's without limit, without bounds.
Not based on the kind of hierarchy not based on the mind. It's based much more on force and politics and power.
Oh, absolutely it is.
In that sense, he shares that with Marx, right? It's about in the end power.
Exactly. Consider the name, Bronze Age Pervert, or the book, Bronze Age Mindset.
So what's Bronze Age? What's typical of the Bronze Age?
So Bap wants to return to a pre-Socratic age. He wants to return to literally to the Bronze Age. He has said explicitly, and I'm quoting, "Death to logocentrism, death to reason, death to philosophy," which, like Nietzsche, he equates with logocentrism, that is, and philosophy with Socrates and the Greek philosophers. He wants to return to a pre-Socratic Homeric age, where individuals, he has a different view of human nature. He wants to do away with reason, and he wants to elevate intuition, instincts, will, what the Greeks called thumos, which is a kind of spiritedness. He talks about innate blood and desire. So in other words, he wants a return to the Dionysian in rejection of the Apollonian.
Yes, and just to remind everybody, Ayn Rand has a famous essay, Apollo versus Dionysus. So where she contrasts the two, and I think it's obvious, comes down strongly on the side of Apollo.
Right, and he comes down strongly on the side of Dionysius. He wants to liberate man, what he thinks are man's natural instincts, intuitions. He talks about the unquenchable lust for power. And so therefore, his view of human nature also, so in other words, that is to say, he views man's his instincts, his hormones, his blood, his desire, his will, as that which is most defining and fundamental about human nature, not the fact that man is the rational being, right?
Yeah, so you said earlier that he rejects nihilism, but don't you think he is a nihilist?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, he rejects the nihilism of the left, but there's a sense in which he himself is a nihilist. He's a nihilist because fundamentally, in the rejection of what he calls logocentrism and reason and philosophy, I mean, there's a sense in which you could say that's the ultimate form of nihilism. And by the way, that's a nihilism that he shares in common with the postmodern left, right? Because they reject the same things, right? And so he is, in many ways, despite his rejection of egalitarianism and nihilism, he does nonetheless share a great deal in common with those that he's opposed to. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And so this view of human nature that he has translates into moral action and into political action. So morally speaking, he's a kind of, to use a character from Plato's Republic, he's what I call Thrasymacheian, or he advocates a view of justice that one can describe as Thrasymacheian, by which I mean Thrasymachus was a character primarily in Book 1 of the Republic, who really makes famous the doctrine might makes right, right? So in other words, there is no right, which is to say there is no objective view of justice or of human action. There is only will to power, right? A concept which he takes directly from Nietzsche. So might makes right. And so those who are strongest, both in terms of willpower and of physical strength, of courage, they should be allowed to roam the earth, literally roam the earth and conquer.
That's the Bronze Age.
That is
So
the Bronze Age.
what's similar, if you will, about these different strands within this new right? What's similar between the tradcons, because the tradcons tolerate BAP. I mean, and Claremont review books have clearly kind of embraced at least some of the Bapists, right, in their online publication at least. What is similar about them? What's the attraction of BAP to people in the Catholic conservative tradition?
I would say it's two things. First, it is, as I've already suggested, the rejection of conservatism and libertarianism, Inc.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. And number two, which I've already suggested as well, is their anti-Americanism, by which I'm using the term Americanism as a kind of as a way to sum up what I consider to be the moral political philosophy of the American founding.
Well, and the third would be a rejection of the left and their view of the left as the enemy and the be all end all of the only thing to be focused on. And I think to some extent that the tradcons realize that they have been part of the, what did you call them? The kind of traditional conservatism, and that they have failed, and that maybe BAP brings new blood or new energy or new excitement to the cause.
Yeah. And I think this is something that we should all be thinking about, right? So I'm a proponent of a free society.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm working for.
Yep.
Is a free society, and I recognize that the totalitarian or postmodern left is in many ways, I think it is the primary threat to a free society. And I also recognize the fecklessness of Brooks Brothers conservatism and white paper libertarianism.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I
listen, fecklessness. They're not just a fecklessness. Not just that they're ineffective, but they actually do damage. Much of their ideas, as we discussed in neoconservatism, lead to BAP, lead to inevitably, because they're bad ideas, and they're ideas based on also fundamentally a rejection of reason and individualism. So they're going to lead to these others, and that's true both, I think, of the conservatives and the libertarians.
Absolutely, conservatives in particular, right? Share the same moral premise as the left, which is altruism, right? And I mean, this altruism and its psychological cognate, which is guilt. I mean, these have been I think the primary factors that are at the heart of this, what I call fecklessness of traditional conservatism and even libertarianism. And so, what we need to, what I think it is, Yaron, and you and I have talked about this privately before, as I've said, just in today's show, I do think the tectonic plates, the cultural tectonic plates underneath this country are shifting in massive ways. And it's important for the proponents of a free society, and objectivists in particular, to understand how those cultural tectonic plates are shifting. And we have to find a way to be able to speak to this generation, this young generation, that on the one hand has a sense of hopelessness on the one hand, and on the other hand, a sense that what they need to do is just fight, and that's all there is just fighting the left. But that's radically insufficient, right? You have to have a positive vision
that's different than the left's.
That's different from the left's, right?
Because their positive vision is the same as the left's. It's the same nihilism. I mean, the great tragedy, I think, today in America is, and somebody asked about this, is can we even define left and right? Aren't they all the same? Well, in a sense, they're all the same. So somebody says, can you or Thompson define right wing versus left wing ideology? It seems like the closer one examines the differences, the more faint the line between them becomes. Authoritarian is authoritarian, no. And I'd say, yes, authoritarian is authoritarian. It's useful to differentiate between authoritarian of the left, authoritarian of the right, for a variety of intellectual reasons to be able to combat them. But essentially, they're the same thing. There's a nihilism of the left and nihilism of the right. There's the common good of the left and the common good of the right. The public interest of the left, public interest of the right. But it's somebody, you know, I've always said the spectrum is individualism, collectivism. And then at some point, the collectivism branches into two, right? One goes right and one goes left, but they're both collectivists. And they kind of get really close to each other at the extreme. So do you think this has traction? That is, if we project out and you know, doing these things is always risky, but if we think 10, 15 years out, 20 years out, is BAP bigger? Is that the danger? Are the tradcons more influential? What is the trajectory if nothing is done to combat these guys?
That's a good and a hard question. You know, on the one hand, I'd like to think that BAP and BAPism is a passing fad. That you know, eventually these young men will grow up. Maybe they'll get married, have kids, coach little league baseball, you know, and have and see the silliness of all of this. But you know, on the other hand, it is growing. It is absolutely growing, and it also turns out that the Catholic tradcon movement is growing. So, I mean, I let's just say I've heard that at one well-known Ivy League university, in fact, the most likely of all Ivy League universities, has a substantial faction of young graduate students who are who are Catholic integralists. That is, who believe in throne and altar, who believe, you know, whose first allegiance is to the Pope, wow. and they would like to see an American monarchy.
Wow. So I mean, I agree with that. I think that what this is scary is not in the sense that any one of these will be exactly what the future leads to, but that so many people are rejecting liberty on the right now. We know that this has happened already on the left. They're rejecting freedom, liberty, and really scary, the founding fathers, right? They always used to claim allegiance to the founding fathers. That it's hard to tell what their manifestation will be in 10 years, 20 years. But we know, I think, that this is going to grow. And who knows how these movements might unite under a banner of common good, under a banner of authoritarianism, under a banner of more materialistic action orientation. Who knows what manifestation it will take? But just like the alt-right, in a sense, evolved into this, who knows where this is going to go? But it's not going in any good direction.
Well, I'll tell you where it's going. It's going toward Weimar. It's going toward Weimar Germany of the 1920s, where the left and the right want to exclude the proponents of a free society, right? So I mean, this is the reason why they are attacking me so vociferously, right? Because I actually represent a genuine alternative to what they're proposing relative to the left, right? As we've been talking about, they have more in common with the left than they apparently have in common with me. And so I've become, certainly with, well, actually, to be honest, with both the Catholic tradcons and with the BAP boys, I've become public enemy number one, right? So since
compliment.
Yeah, since the Pajama Boy Nietzschean's essay was published, well over 20 essays, I think maybe now 25 essays have been published in response to that essay. So I'm sort of fighting a two-front war. right now against both the Catholic tradcons and the Bap boys. And so, but this is the issue, Yaron. This won't be a passing fad if we don't fight it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? That's
it might be a passing fad in the sense of the particulars of BAP, but it won't be a passing fad in terms of the ideas behind it.
That's right. No,
that's and I think that's absolutely right. I think we are you can see the nihilism on the left explicitly, which was the same in Weimar Germany. And shockingly, people always, it was the right or kind of a unification of the nihilism of left and right, which was what the Nazis were. They united both the right and the left.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that they've been saying about me is that they've been criticizing me for is quote, punching right. Right. The first.
Well, I get that. It's on the chat, all over the chat. Why are we even talking about this? Isn't the real threat the left? Why are we punching right? We should be all focused on punching left. Later, we could deal with them, and why is that wrong?
Well, look, the first thing to say, anybody who knows me,
yeah,
right, and maybe your audience doesn't know who I am.
No, this isn't about you. This is about me primarily, because they, and it doesn't matter. See, to them, and this is, I'm sure, to BAP and to the tradcons, it doesn't matter how much you've punched left. That's irrelevant. It's the fact that you're daring to punch right that offends them. This is just a rationalization. The fact that we're not spending every living moment of our life fighting the left is a complete rationalization. They don't want you punching right because they don't want you punching right. It has nothing to do with.
Yeah, but those are just labels, right? Which is why I reject
punching authoritarianism.
Exactly. To repeat, I'm a proponent of a free society, and I will fight all enemies against the free society. And that is the totalitarian left and the fascist right. Because the fascist right shares nothing in common in terms of the positive moral and political vision that they espouse with what I espouse. There are no similarities. I have nothing in common with them. Mm-hmm. Right. And, I mean, this is something that I walked into by accident. I had no idea when I first published the Pajama Boy Nietzschean's essay that I would spend almost a year fighting these guys. And let me also tell you that not a single one of them has responded intellectually.
Yeah, I've seen the articles. I've seen the articles. They're pathetic. Their response.
Yeah, I mean, they're all ad hominem. I mean, everything that has been published in response to me, either in terms of these essays or on Twitter, has all been ad hominem, and sometimes more than ad hominem.
Yeah, say something about the more than ad hominem. I think it's important for people to know who these bastards really are.
Okay, so let me just, before I do that, take a moment to promote my Substack, because that's where this has all been happening recently. So,
yeah, and by the way, you can find that Substack in the description below. I've linked to the Substack and to the 5 or 6 articles about BAP and the dissident right.
Yeah. So my Substack is titled The Redneck Intellectual. It's at C. Bradley Thompson, one word, .substack.com. And in the last few months, I've published a series of essays, first in response to my Catholic tradcon critics, and then in response to Bronze Age Pervert and his followers. And let me focus in particular on a couple of essays that I published in late December, early January. The first of which was titled Bronze Age Pervert and the Fascist New Frontier. And the second one was titled German Nihilism, American Style. And then finally, there was a third, Bronze Age Pervert or BAP and the Bap Boys, something like that. Anyway, they initiated on Twitter a coordinated campaign, and this is demonstrable when I say coordinated. It was a campaign actually coordinated by BAP himself to have his minions attack me on Twitter. And of course, it's all the standard, this is their term, not mine. It's all the standard shit posting, demanding that I, quote, post physique, describing me as cognitively female, and, you know, every other possible insult. None of which bothers me, of course. I mean, particularly during this lockdown, all of this shit posting on Twitter against me has provided an enormous form of amusement and laughter for me. But it took a nasty turn after BAP and the Fascist New Frontier essay came out, when they started libeling me online. And then after they were libeling me, and this again is demonstrably provable that they were libeling me and defaming my character, then they started threatening me physically. And then after they threatened me physically, then they started threatening my wife and children. And threatening to put together a dossier against me, which they were going to deliver to the dean of my college. Right. So these are the people that I'm dealing with, and they continue the libel, and they also continue to say nothing substantive in response to my arguments.
So, I know that this has distracted you from writing the second volume of your big magnus opus on the Declaration of the Constitution. Are you making progress on the second book?
No.
This really has taken over.
It has taken over. I mean, I will take this opportunity, since you've asked, to tell you and your audience that volume 2 of what's now going, it's actually now projected at a 3-volume, you use the word magnum opus, I'll take that, of my work on the American founding. Volume 2, I'm happy to tell you, is at least 2/3, if not three-quarters written. So if I can just find a little time, hopefully this summer, I hope to make real progress on finishing volume 2.
And that's, of course, the positive vision, right? That's the work on establishing the political foundations for this country, you know, through the Declaration and the Constitution, and the positive, while you're, because it doesn't help to fight the bad guys unless you're offering something positive.
Yeah, and furthermore, I guess they should be pleased to know that I'm getting bored with them.
Yeah. Well, don't get too bored, because we need you on the battle lines. Yeah.
In the end, they're just not that interesting.
No, but their power, they're going to increase. I still think they're going to increase their power. Now, again, not in this particular form, but I'm very pessimistic about the right and the direction it's heading in terms of intellectually, which is what these guys, and then the influence that has on politics, which I think is, so both left and right, I think, are going to get just more corrupt, not less. And unless something shifts in this country, because you're right, tectonic shift has happened, and it's drawing both the left and the right towards nihilism, and that the only outcome of that is authoritarianism. If somebody rising up to clean the mess, right, to straighten us all up,
right? When
the leftist and rightist gangs are fighting each other in the streets, just like Weimar Germany, people get pissed off when what they want is law and order. What they want is to clean the mess up, and they don't care if it comes from the left or the right. They just want a strong man.
Yeah, of course, that's absolutely right. But there's a sense in which Iran, I actually have a deeper criticism, not of the reactionary right, but of the people on our side.
Sure.
Right. So they are, at least for the time being, on a cultural level, they seem to be winning, and they seem to be winning because there's a vacuum. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, where are the people on our side, right? It can't simply be Yaron Brook and Brad Thompson fighting the battle against the totalitarian left and the authoritarian right. right? We need intellectual allies, and we need more people from our side, the so-called intellectuals of our side, to start doing something.
Well, I mean, I give you an example of kind of how disappointing it is in a sense, right? You remember I did a debate at Clemson, a discussion with Andrew Sullivan, and Andrew Sullivan is a really thoughtful conservative, and on certain issues, I agree with him completely. And I love reading him no matter what, even if I disagree with him, because he's such a good writer. But Andrew Sullivan represents this other group of conservatives. What was it? You called them, I think this is a term they've adopted, but I didn't hear it until I heard it from you. The front porch conservatives. You know, this is what Ayn Rand called the divine right of stagnation. These are the conservatives that just want to keep everything the same. Don't upset the cart. We hate Trump, but we hate Trump because what we really want is just stability and everybody to be calm and everything to be nice. And we want people to be able to sit on their back porches and just have, I just did a show on having a normal life. You know, there's this philosopher who's advocating now for, why can't we just settle for a normal life on our back porches, you know, twiddling our thumbs. So, and then I read Fringe, who writes constantly about the evangelical world and how you got to be a good evangelical, not like those crazy evangelicals. And it's like, these people are nuts if they think they're going to win buying into the premise. So the universe of our allies is actually very small, given how foundational and how philosophical the battle ultimately is.
Yeah, mint julep conservatism can never win,
no.
Right? Because that's the sense in which there's something to BAP, and you can understand the appeal. It's Fight Club. It's the Fight Club right. They do want to fight the right. They want to fight the left.
Yep.
And front porch republicanism or conservatism or mint julep conservatism.
Mint julep, I've never heard of that one. That's good.
Yeah, they don't have the wherewithal. They don't understand the nature of the intellectual battle that's taking place. And by the way, you know, it just occurred to me that there's a direct parallel between these mint julep conservatives and in Atlas Shrugged. They are the conservative version of Directive 10289, right? If you remember James Taggart's response to Directive 1089, as he screams, "I just want everything to stop."
Exactly.
Right? No more innovation, no more change.
Yep.
Let us just, you know, catch our breath.
Yep. Yes. So yeah, join us in the battle. There's a battle, and it's only going to get more real. I think. I think it's going to get much more real and much more in the streets and much more in our faces, and even more political than it has been. It's things are going to get much worse before they get better. All right, let's go to some questions. We got a bunch of them. Oh wait, so this is just because this guy gave. So he's contributing $100 for me to watch this documentary. Thank you. He says America is going down in quality. It appears that living on an island like Puerto Rico makes sense. What is Brad's thoughts on going overseas? Any great states? Any great countries outside of America? And you're talking to, of course, a Canadian, so I'm not sure how he's going to answer.
Well, Canada is not the place that I'm going. I can promise you that. I always thought the South Island of New Zealand, maybe like Dunedin, New Zealand.
Church Christ, right? No, Queenstown. Queenstown at the top.
Yeah, and Christchurch is on the North Island as well, I believe.
No, South Island. Christchurch is on South Island, but it's a city down at the I think the most beautiful place on planet Earth is, in terms of a town, a place you could live, is Queenstown in the South Island. It's right in the mountains. It's basically Lord of the Rings country.
Right.
Everything around you looks like the scenery of the movie Lord of the Rings. It's amazing. And Stephanie says it's Christchurch, not Church Christ. Thank you, Stephanie, for correcting me. So any place other than, yeah, I mean, I'm with you on the South Island of New Zealand, I was more enthusiastic before COVID when they basically shut down shut down New Zealand and banned all flights and isolated the place to the rest of the world. A little spooky. It is the most beautiful place in the world.
Yeah. So another place would be St. Helena, the island St. Helena in the middle of the South Atlantic.
Okay.
I believe, which is where Napoleon was exiled to.
So Brad's alternative to the United States of America note, a tiny little islands in the middle of the good thing about New Zealand is, I always said, when the world ends, you want to be in New Zealand because nobody wants it, right? China's not going to invade New Zealand. They'll invade Australia because it has natural resources. And America isn't going to invade New Zealand, and Russia's not going to invade New Zealand. And I think St. Helena is even safer than New Zealand in that sense.
Yeah, and I do have I do have my secret place in the United States that I'll be going to, but
Gold's Gulch.
I can't tell you what it is, or I'd have to tell you.
It's Gold's Gulch. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Compared to Canada, say Erin O'Toole, a mildly traditionalistic central planner with great free trade plan, has 30% support, and Maxime Bernier, mild isolationist, but also fantastic on other deregulation, 1%. What are the cultural issues in Canada?
I have no idea. I am formally Canadian. I haven't lived in Canada in 40 years. I don't follow Canadian politics. I don't follow Canadian culture.
See, following Israeli politics, because I haven't been to Israel and I don't really follow that much, but Israel is easy, right? Netanyahu is always prime minister. It doesn't matter. This is the fourth election in 2 years, and he's probably going to win, by a smallest of margin and stay. So it's easy to follow Israeli politics because it's just about Netanyahu. All right, let's see. Is the population becoming more entitled and reliant on government because the more regulated and statist we become, the less options they offer self-sufficiency in the marketplace? So is the government basically killing opportunity? So people become more government reliant? Yes.
Yeah. I think the causes of the conformity and the reliance of people on government is more than, it has a lot more to do with just regulation, but I think regulation is a part of it. And once you create a culture that has become reliant on government services and government handouts, generation after generation after generation, it does change. It fundamentally changes the nature of the culture. And so, for me, the more interesting question is, to what degree is the original American spirit of liberty, to what degree does it still exist in the United States? Right. And my fear is that with every passing year, some small percentage of that spirit of liberty is evaporating. And Americans are increasingly losing it. And
you can see that, Leonard Peikoff talked about it after 9/11 in his talk, Americans versus America, and how much is being lost and how 9/11 revealed that. And I think COVID, the response to COVID, the acceptance, the willing acceptance by Americans, the support of Americans for lockdowns and just the shrugging and not caring about the unlimited power we've given government. Truly unlimited, if you think about it, is just astounding to me. I never thought I'd see it. To some extent, I think there's more demonstrations going on in Germany against lockdowns than there are in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's right. The lockdown is going to have a profound effect on the psyche of the American people in ways that we can't see or understand right now. Right? I think it's only going to emerge over the course of the next decade how COVID and the lockdowns have changed the rhythms of life and the sense of life of ordinary everyday Americans. And and the ways in which, much of life is lived in what I call the seams. Much of our lives are the things that are unseen, but are fundamentally important to us. They're in the seams. And it's hard to see, right, how the lockdown has affected life in the seams, but it is inevitably, invariably affecting life in the seams. But it's just not seen, right? We see the big things, the things that get all the news and attention, but the ways in which it has affected our psyches and just interpersonal relations. Like, consider, for instance, when you're no longer permitted to seeing your parents or grandparents.
Yep.
Right? You go a year and a half without being able to see the people that you love the most, right? What is the effect of that on people over the long term?
Well, I think it's an issue of what you said. You're not permitted because, let's remember that the generations that immigrated here left their parents and grandparents and knew they would never see them again, but they made that choice. But here, choice has been, to me, what's the tragedy is the choice has been constrained, limited dramatically. We don't have those choices, and that we don't seem to care. And then, of course, what are the consequences of all the people who are now, whose businesses have been lost, whose blood, sweat, and tears and everything they put into them? Also, what happens to the American psyche when we start expecting bailouts, not just the big banks, but every one of us, right? We've printed $5 trillion to bail out Americans, all of us. And that is just, yeah, I agree with you. It's going to take the next decade to see how it manifests. Just like, I think the last 20 years have been interesting because 9/11, financial crisis, COVID, to me will be 3 major historical events condensed into a relatively short period of time that all have a negative psychological and material impact on the American life and the American sense of life, that we'll see if America can recover.
Yeah.
See, the fact that people admire and give status to the most vindictive and vicious levels of trolling is evidence that the hip thing to be in our culture is deeply nihilistic. I guess that's a statement, not a question, but I think that's right. And it's scary.
Yeah, I agree. I will tell you, one of the things that has really come to concern me and certainly bother me is the fact that all of this online trolling is done under pseudonyms, right? So all of my critics, all of them, are writing under pseudonyms, right? And they claim that they're using pseudonyms because their views, are so counter to the mainstream culture, right? And that they've got, these ideas that are subversive and otherwise they'd be censored, et cetera, or at least morally censored. But the fact of the matter is, none of these people are really just promoting ideas. Other than BAP, what they're doing is they're just shit posting every day, all day long, under pseudonyms. They're shit posting.
No, it's cowards. It's cowards.
It is.
Technology really, one of the things that technology does, that social media does, allows cowards to express themselves in ways that they could not and would not ever do in real life, because in real life somebody would slap them. And at the end of the day, they are cowards and they are weak, and they might put pictures of buff physiques online, but my guess is even if they're buff, they can't use it. And most of them are not even buff. Most of them are just in their mother's, basement playing video games.
Yeah, which is why in the original Pajama Boy Nietzschean's essay, the single line that bothered them the most, that sent them into paroxysms of vitriol, was a line that I had referring to their, quote, 175-pound bench presses. Yeah, all these tough guys, undoubtedly posting photographs of somebody else, not them, are really just in the end weaklings and sissies.
So other than you two, are there any intellectuals taking on the alt-right losers in any meaningful way? I mean, Ben Shapiro did for a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think this round though. I don't think he's taking on the Catholic traditionalist or the BAP. I don't think, unless they express, the alt-right he took on, but he hasn't done that in a long time.
Yeah. So, there's this guy, Nick Fuentes, that Shapiro has had some exchanges with. So I think
this is a real scumbag. I mean, he's an anti-Semitic, racist, just disgusting. He uses his real name, I think. But he is, and he's got a more mainstream appeal, it seems to me, less intellectual, more, ruffians in the backyard kind of type of people attracted to him.
Yeah. I will say it has been disappointing to me. As I said earlier, I'm fighting a two-front war. Well, actually a three-front war. The Catholic tradcons, the Bapsters, those are two fronts. But of course, every day, all day, I'm also fighting the left.
Yep.
So I'm fighting a three-front war. But certainly relative to the Bapsters and the Catholic tradcons, I've had very, very few people come to my defense. So, like,
the tradcons probably more than the Baps, because one of the things I see on the right is they don't, the better people on the right don't consider it worthy of their attention, right? But the tradcons, at least, there's some writing on from people like Fringe and others, but they can be effective because they agree philosophically. Fundamentally, they ultimately agree.
Yeah. I mean, after the essay, after my Bronze Age Pervert and the Fascist New Frontier essay came out, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Baps followers who came onto my Twitter account and for a week were just, totally trashing me. And I had almost no defenders, which was disappointing. I mean, part of me says I don't need anybody defending me. I do a pretty good job defending myself, and I don't ask people to do it. But we also have to understand is that this is an intellectual and cultural war, and one or two people cannot win a war against an entire movement.
Yep. No, absolutely. This is going to have to get much bigger. All right, let's see. The other day I heard some young Republicans undergo a long discussion on Clubhouse. Are you in Clubhouse yet, Brad?
No.
Oh God, you need to be in Clubhouse. It's the place. About how sexual liberation was a mistake and that women could not handle it. It was so comically horrible that I left. So I guess there's some of this right attitude towards women and sex is even on Clubhouse, which is more of a Silicon Valley left-leaning kind of social media, like everything else. All right. What does Brad think about the musical Hamilton if he has seen it?
That question seems to be a plant question.
No, it's
no, I understand. No.
$5 question. It's not a tweet. It came now, but
right. Yeah. So I have not seen it.
Yep. Okay.
That's the bottom line. And if the subtext to the question, and I'm not suggesting it is, but if the subtext is, what is my view of Alexander Hamilton versus John Adams?
I don't think that was the. I don't think
because that's a question in a debate that I get drawn into quite a bit with some objectivists.
Yeah. Yes, you do. And I mean, I've seen Hamilton. I enjoyed it. You don't view a musical like that as a work of political philosophy or history. I think it's ridiculous how they portray both Madison and Jefferson. But I think generally it is pro-founding fathers. It is pro-independence. It has some fantastic lines about freedom and liberty. And it's done in a very joyous, positive kind of way. I'm not a huge fan of the music, but it wasn't ridiculously offensive either. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. And it was, and it is positive. And there is a cultural question here, which after you see it, we should talk about, because there's a question of, it's incredibly popular, right? And incredibly popular with many people who associate themselves with the left. And it's interesting why that is, and what is it about now beyond the obvious, there were all minorities on the stage and all of that. But because the text is pretty good in terms of the words in it. So, all right.
I'm also not a musicals kind of guy. So chances are
he's trying to avoid going to see it. I can tell.
I will. Let me.
I resisted it because I can't stand rap, and this is kind of hip hop rap type style, and I hate rap, and I view it as almost anti music, and I still enjoyed it. So I have to say, in spite of my resistance, you do need like you need subtitles to follow everything, but it was good. Anyway, you want to say?
Let me just take this opportunity again to promote something. So I'm going to be going out to California in a month and a half to record a PragerU video on John Adams, and I've just written a script for it, and the theme is John Adams, America's greatest founding father.
Good. I love it when that gets all stood up. We can have these massive debates about that. Good. Well, we know that's your position because you gave a Ocon talk titled that.
Yes, correct.
In the pre-Ocon days, I think that might have been Lyceum. I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I did give 2 lectures in around 2002 at the Ocon. I think it was Ocon still.
Maybe it was Ocon then, yeah.
It was around Palo Alto.
Right. Well, I know at least one person who's going to be very upset at you.
Yes.
But actually quite a few more than one. I think we've answered this, but maybe not, given that it's a question. Is there any coherent vision of the world that BAP crowd wants to implement?
A coherent vision of the world.
Coherent, yeah. I mean, it is, I think, what you said about they want might is right. They want roaming knights to roam around the world conquering stuff, and they want to be the conquerors, although it's unlikely they would be. If I can add that. Yeah. And I mean, let me mention 2 things that I haven't mentioned thus far about BAP's philosophy, if that's what you can even call it. He is a proponent of the need for what he calls Lebensraum. That is the struggle for the ownership of space, right? And where have we heard the concept of Lebensraum before? And furthermore, he's also an advocate of what's known as Lebensborn. And what is Lebensborn? Well, Lebensborn was an invention of the Nazi SS. It was a eugenics program. And so BAP has called for both Lebensraum and Lebensborn, which the one requires. And the Claremont Review of Books knows this, and they somebody like Anton still, will associate with this. Yeah, the Lebensraum stuff is clearly in Bronze Age Mindset, the book. The first call for Lebensborn, the eugenics program, came out of BAP's Caribbean Rhythms podcast a couple months ago. Yeah. What's the relationship with this other guy? What's his name? Jarvis. Molbug or whatever. Molbug? Yeah, Mencius Molbug. If you hadn't botched the name, I could have told you immediately. Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin, that's right. Is the name. So what's the question? What's the relationship between him and BAP? Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, what I do know, maybe the only thing I know is about this question, is that it was Curtis Yarvin, namely Mencius Moldbug, who introduced Michael Anton to the Bronze Age Pervert.
I remember that.
That I know for a fact. And Bronze Age Pervert mentions Mencius Moldbug on his podcast every now and then, mostly positively. They seem to disagree on some things. I don't really follow Moldbug, mostly because I just find some of his writing to be unintelligible and bizarre. What I do know is he thinks the American Revolution was a mistake and a tragedy, that the English deep state should have pounded the Americans and implemented a monarchy in the United States.
And he got some support, at least at some point, from Peter Thiel, and so there's a vast network of connectivity here. And he's a Silicon Valley guy,
right?
I think he's an entrepreneur, Silicon Valley entrepreneur. All right. Altruism is such an entrenched frozen abstraction. It's going to take thousands of intellectuals in key academic cultural positions before we can even begin to crack that. Yep, that's true. Right. It's going to take thousands. I'm waiting. I love these questions. You know, people just write questions to try to catch me. You know, can we get you on to say something positive about Trump? That's the purpose of the question. There's no other purpose. So here's the question. Is the deregulation under Trump the reason the COVID vaccine were produced so quickly? So no, the answer is clearly no, because the COVID vaccines were produced so quickly because of the brilliance and genius of Pfizer and Moderna and everybody involved there. And what Trump did, which helped us get the vaccines early, is reduced the barriers in terms of approval. So if you change it to, is the deregulation under Trump, it's one act of deregulation temporary. This wasn't permanent. No permanent deregulation happened. This is a part of warp speed. He reduced the barriers of the FDA to approving the drugs. So was Trump the reason the COVID vaccine was approved so quickly? The answer would be yes. The one good thing Trump did, or one of the good things Trump did, he did several good things, was that he permitted the FDA to move relatively fast in approving the vaccine. Still, I think 6 months later than it should have. I think we could have started vaccinating people in June. But that's a whole other, I've talked about that. That's a whole other story. How has Kant influenced the right? Emmanuel. Just off the cuff. Come on, Brad.
Well,
in profound ways, I'd say.
Yeah. Kant is the philosophic father of nihilism. Right. So, I mean, you can trace the nihilism of both the left and the right. I mean, ultimately to Kant, the destruction of reason as man's means of acquiring knowledge is the birth of nihilism. Right. That's actually, I mean, that's something that I would like to work on. I would love to write a book at some point. You know, if I can get these other ones done first, I'd love to write a book on the history of nihilism, the origin and the history of nihilism, and then its manifestation in late 20th and early 21st century America.
Well, the other book, I mean, this to some extent, Leonard Peikoff has done this, and that is the connection between those German philosophy and American history. And you have a chapter in your book on the influence German philosophy had on the slave owners and slave society really in the South, and the intellectuals of the South, which I didn't know, which was completely new, the influence of Hegel and others. But the progressive movement came from, in a sense, came intellectually from Germany. the slave owner society came from Germany. All these negative movements in American history came from Germany, and primarily came from, ultimately from Kant. I mean, where did Hegel and all these other guys come from, in a sense? I mean, the other way in which Kant influences this is, remember that Kant's goal is basically to save religion from the Enlightenment. And to the extent that he achieved that, all of our problems today are caused by him. Because, would we have as much religiosity in America today if not for Kant? If the founders and the Enlightenment had progressed and not being halted by Kant, would the influence of religion on the right be so dramatic? Would there be such a thing as tradcons? Because it's as Brad said, it's undermining of reason. That's the essential.
Yeah, I think it's true to say that all bad things emanate from Germany. Certainly all bad ideas seem to emanate from
some good music.
Well, good music of a certain era. That I think that is absolutely true.
Well, that's connected to this comment somebody makes. I just heard Leonard Peikoff will be doing a lecture next month with Lisa Van Dam about the value of operetta. Do you think you'll attend as well? I'll certainly listen to it. I don't know that I'll attend, but I am. I've talked to operetta is a product of Viennese culture, so somewhat German, but much more Viennese. And there's a whole issue of to what extent is Austria influenced by Germany and so on. But there was a period in the early part of the 20th century where that Viennese culture was quite amazing. And I think Leonard will talk about that in that it produced this art form called operetta, which is just one of the most benevolent, pro-life, pro-happiness art that's ever been produced. So I know you're big on beauty and so on. Operetta is just, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's light, it's easy to listen to, and it really is a music of happiness and joy. And Leonard will obviously talk a lot more about that. But I've had long conversations with Leonard about operetta, and he's a huge fan of it, particularly in the last few years. Of course, the person who introduced Leonard to operetta was Ayn Rand, and they used to sit together and listen to operetta records. Now he can watch them on DVDs, which is a lot more enjoyable than even that. All right, let's go through these quickly. All right, that's not really a question. Is there anything related to the topic? All right, here's another one. One of these gotcha, you're on questions. So bear with me. You brought out some of my best followers. Brad, I've been told by objectivists that I'm a racist to oppose Islamic immigration. And in the chat, he accuses me of this. Am I wrong? Do you think Islamic immigration has been good for Europe? You want to get into this one, Brad?
My answer is no and no.
Oh, no, good. Am I wrong? Is he wrong? I don't know what he's wrong. In opposing Islamic immigration, Brad says no. Do you think Islamic immigration has been good for Europe? No. All right. I don't think anybody thinks Islamic immigration is good for Europe, but I will note this just as an aside. Concretes and concretes, specific concretes don't prove anything, granted, but many of us will benefit from the Pfizer vaccine developed by two scientists in Germany at a company, a startup in Germany that they started. It's their company. They are billionaires now. And the two scientists are both children of Turkish immigrants to Germany. So yes, culturally, overall, Europe is no better for having Islamic immigration, but in some concretes, they're far better. And it depends on which Muslims, depends on which Muslims. I am pro-Islamic immigration to Europe in spite of that. Not mass migration, not mass migration in the form it took after the Syrian civil war, but I'm still pro-immigration. And once you start differentiating like that, it's very dangerous. Once you start defining which groups are good for your culture and bad for your culture, and determining who should come in and who should not. Oh,
yeah, let me just add to that by saying that I don't like to answer those kinds of questions because for the following reason: I have opinions, but they're mostly uninformed opinions, and I prefer to talk about things that I can back up. I mean, this is the kind of issue about which you spent considerably more time than I have thinking about it and researching it. I mean, I'm really just an ignoramus on that question.
I'm shocked, Brad. Wait a minute. Wait. This is a historic moment. We've got a public intellectual saying that he only wants to talk about things he knows something about. That's unusual.
Yeah, and it's even more particularly unusual because I reject the label intellectual.
Why? That's weird. Why?
Yeah, I don't think of myself as an intellectual. Do I spend my days thinking and writing? Sure, but there's just something pretentious.
No. There we disagree completely.
Yeah,
you are an intellectual, but more than that,
I mean,
you're a public intellectual.
Given all the public intellectuals, indeed, just given all the intellectuals that I know, I don't really want to be associated with them.
It doesn't matter whether you want to be associated with them or not. You're acting like them. The difference is in the quality of what you do or the nature of the ideas that you profess. But you're engaged in the same activity. You know, just because a good bricklayer does a much better job than all other bricklayer doesn't make him a non-bricklayer. The activity you engage in is the activity of an intellectual, and therefore you are one. It's not pretentious. That's just the activity you engage in. You know I'm right.
I would never call myself an intellectual.
Well, then I will.
I mean,
that is the public intellectual.
Others are free to do it.
Okay. Right. One day, okay. So now I have a new mission in life to get Brad to call himself an intellectual. We're going to add this to the list of items Brad and I disagree about and get into violent arguments about, none of which are that important, but still fun to argue about anyway. Although you know, coupling is an important issue.
Well, yeah, but if they're not important, then why do we argue about them so vociferously?
Because it's fun. Because on the important stuff we tend to agree. There's a few important things that we probably disagree on, but most important things we agree on.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Professor, do the alt-right and BAP want craterocracy, which is a form of government by the strong? Never heard of that one. Are they also into Conan, Frank Frazetta images, Vikings, etc.?
Well, I'll start with the latter part. BAP openly and explicitly in Bronze Age mindset calls for a new generation. I mean, the ideal man for BAP is the warrior, the pirate, the conquistador. So a big part of, I mean, he talks a lot about the Spanish conquistadors in Bronze Age mindset. But what, of course, is deeply and profoundly ironic about the call for pirates, warriors, and conquistadors is that none of these Bapsters have actually engaged in any of this. And there are places all around the world where they can do it. And in fact, at the end of one of my essays, I challenged all the BAP boys to put their money where their mouth is. And in fact, I told them that I would pay for the first 3 who came forward, I would pay their airfare to fly to Africa and if they joined Al-Shabaab.
Well, and they could go to Afghanistan. I mean, there are plenty of places where they could.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't have to join anybody. They shouldn't join anybody. They should conquer those places, right? And establish white man's rule over those places. I mean, those are, you know, that's what they really want ultimately.
Hell, just if you're not willing to join an Afghani warlord or Al-Shabaab, then at least, you know, join the French Foreign Legion.
There you go, French Foreign Legion. They still exist. I guess
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, since left and right are similar, is there really even a battle for real liberty without objectivism? No.
Ultimately, the answer has to be no.
I mean, we are the real, I mean, I say this without, it's somewhat pretentious, but I think justifiable. We are the real heirs of the founding fathers. I mean, Ayn Rand is, in a sense that she provides the real philosophical, whatever they got philosophically wrong, and the law got philosophically wrong, Ayn Rand corrects, and she lays that foundation for the founding on much more solid ground. So objectivism is the heir of the Enlightenment. All right, let's see. He said regarding Hamilton that there's no subtext to his question. He was just curious what you thought about the musical's historical representation of the founders, if you'd seen them. So, honest question. It was an honest question. Why is the left organizing to get rid of Andrew Cuomo? Because he's not enough of a leftist for their liking?
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, every now and then the left, it's very infrequent, but every now and then they circle the wagons or they form circular firing squads. My guess is that the left knows a lot more about Cuomo's vices and, if not crimes, than the general public does, and they're probably trying to take him out before.
Yeah, I think it's. I read this piece somewhere, so it's not my thought, but I thought this was really interesting. So here is Cuomo, who is clearly responsible for the deaths of thousands of New Yorkers, right? But bring them back into the nursing homes, and then hiding the numbers, right? So he was, a few weeks ago, we discovered he was hiding the numbers, literally distorting the public record of what he had done. And there were calls for his resignation and all of that. And those were all, and Democrats didn't really rally around that. Almost immediately, he started being accused of sexual harassment. Now, Democrats know how to deal with sexual harassment. And so all these women came out, sexual harassment. We're talking about the deaths of thousands of Americans. Democrats are like, who cares? But sexual harassment is an unforgivable sin because the party is held to the grip of this feminist ideology that, and they look really bad. So now everybody's come out to say, all these political leaders, he should resign. But so far, he's holding on, and he might he might survive this. We'll see. But it changed the conversation, interestingly enough, away from the thousands of people his decisions killed.
Yeah. Part of the issue is he's a thoroughly unlikable human being, right? So even people in his own party dislike the man. And there probably have been long knives out for him for a long time. Sure. And then they just haven't had the opportunity yet.
Yep. Any rich people who you don't think are that high IQ? Yeah, I do actually.
Yes.
Not sure what that proves one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah. And there's actually some good research on this, that the relationship between wealth and IQ is not that strong. The relationship between IQ and other measures of success is, IQ explains, I don't know, I think between 20 and 30% of the success, but not in terms of wealth. It's not correlated that much between. How is existence absolute? That's a metaphysical question. Existence just is. Even talking about it being absolute assumes that it is. And all we say about existence is that it is, and that it's primary.
It's redundant.
Yeah. I don't get metaphysics. It seems so simple. I know it's not in philosophy, but right. Yeah, things are what they are. Fascism is often a reaction to unchecked socialism. Yet you seem to so focused on that future, and you seem less aware of the unchecked socialism part. Same thing.
Is that you or me?
I think it's me, but it's probably to some extent both of us, because that's what we're talking about. You have to fight them both. You have to fight them both, because fascism is no better than socialism, and in some respects worse. It depends on the level of socialism that manifests itself, but you got to fight them both, and there's no order, right or wrong order, in which to fight them.
Yeah, I mean, just to be honest, I don't mean to be testy with the person who's asked this question, but it's hard for me to take seriously, given the fact that I have been fighting the left for 40 plus years. And, you know, it's only every now and then that I've taken the gloves off, as we say in Canada, with authoritarians and fascists of the right. But I mean, my whole life has been fighting the left. So,
and it's ridiculous. We're fighting authoritarians, and in that sense, there's no difference between the left and the right. So just drop it.
Right. And again, I don't think of myself as I you know, I know you've talked about this multiple times on the show, but it just bears repeating that the left-right political spectrum is completely meaningless. And I don't define myself, and I don't define my philosophical and political views along that left-right axis. I'm a proponent of a free society, and I will talk all day long about what that means, what a free society is founded on, and what it looks like. But I will defend all critics of the free society, wherever they are coming from.
Yep. And don't forget, fascism is a form of socialism, in a sense. They're all authoritarians, and they all need to be fought, and you need to fight them constantly. And there's a reason to think, I think, that the long-term outcome is much more likely to be fascism than communism, for a variety of reasons. Who is going to take over Rush Limbaugh's influence on Republicans? I don't know. Why would I care? And I'm not sure he was that influential, but on Republicans. If you remember, you know, he often advocated for candidates who didn't win. I think Rush Limbaugh became, particularly in the last 8 years or so, more vehicle by which his audience shaped his view rather than he shaped the audience's view. And he became afraid of his audience. He became afraid of, for example, of criticizing Trump because the audience loved Trump. So he became, I think he was amazing early on in his career, and then became less influential and much more mouthpiece for, I don't know what to call them, but his audience. Okay. I have dedicated my last school projects to objectivism, comparing Rand to Ibsen. Even convinced my teacher to let me speak about objectivism in my religion and ethics class. This is a guy from Norway, right? So this is in Norway. Thank you, Yaron, for changing the way I see the world. Oh, I didn't realize it was a thank you. Yes, absolutely. That's why I do what I do. It's to find those minds who've never been exposed to Ayn Rand and get them exposed to these ideas. And this is how we win, I think, the battle for liberty in the end. It's not by creating a mass collectivistic movement. It's by changing one mind at a time, and by shaping, you know, by helping those minds find the truth, find the philosophy to guide their lives, which should be your focus, and thus change the world. Let me recommend, was it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is one of Brad's publications. He publishes a Good, the Bad, and the Ugly post once a week, or once a week. It should be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Beautiful, because he has a section on the beautiful. Andrew asked what the thesis of Brad's next book is.
Well, I can tell you well, I'll give you the title, which I think from which you can draw the thesis and the theme. The title is America's Constitutional Mind, on the origin and history of the idea of a written constitution as fundamental law.
Yep. Good. So yes, we're in the business of changing minds in the cause of liberty.
Yeah, and if I could just one more time promo my Substack. It's the Redneck Intellectual. You can get it at cbradleythompson.substack.com. I'd love for people to sign up and get my Substack delivered directly to your front door. And as Yaron said, one of the weekly features is a series that I run called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But the part that's most people seem interested in is the addendum to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is The Beautiful.
Yep. Good. And in The Beautiful, Brad talks about movies, aesthetics generally. So which you guys all know that I'm a big fan of. Which reminds me, one of the things I'll be doing tomorrow is reviewing the 2 movies you guys asked me to review. So the movie Real Genius and Contact. Did you see Contact a long time ago? With
Maybe I did.
Jodie Foster.
Yeah, I think I at the very least saw part of it. I'm not a sci-fi guy, so
Carl Sagan story. Yeah, I don't think of it as a sci-fi really. It's not, the sci-fi part is not what's interesting about it.
Right, but it involves spaceships or aliens or something.
It involves aliens, but no spaceships invited. But it does involve aliens, but very minor role the aliens play. It's mainly about faith versus reason. But it's anyway. I'll tell you guys what I think of it tomorrow. But it's an interesting movie. I think it's and it's well made. It's with Matthew McConaughey, who I think you like.
Yes. Yeah. By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to go.
Yeah, me too.
I've got a call coming up in 3 minutes that I got to take. So.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for
Yaron, thank you.
Good work. And we will do this again. And thank you all guys for listening in, and have a great rest of your weekend. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.